This morning, the Premier says that life will be hard until 70% vaccination rate has been achieved. That appears to be a shift in language. What happened to the green shoots, I must wonder?
Yeah, look, obviously it's a difficult time in Sydney, and the government and everybody in Sydney is doing it tough. I think it's the regions as well, obviously, at the same time, doing it tough to get control of this latest variant. It looks as if we're going to be in lockdown for a longer period than any of us hoped. It's a difficult time and a difficult days for the people of New South Wales at the moment, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, how do you relax, though, when you've got 75% of the state in lockdown? It's not going to happen anytime soon, is it?
No, I mean, we have to listen to the health advice. It has to be based on the expert opinion. We really have to focus on what the impact would mean to our ICU units, our hospitals, interstate travel, the general state of the economy. We can't just let it rip. So I think at the moment, talk of a massive relaxation of restrictions is just way too premature because the stakes are just too high at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, from your observations, how long do you believe at the moment that New South Wales is going to be isolated for?
It looks as until we get those vaccination rates as high as possible, which is the 70 to 80% range, life won't return to normal in Sydney or the regions. And I know it's a very difficult message for all of us to hear. It's such a tough time in Sydney at the moment. And if you're homeschooling or you run a construction firm or you're a tradie or anything, it's a very difficult period. But I think the alternative, which would be to let it rip and relieve restrictions at a time when the Delta variant is running right throughout most of New South Wales, it's just too risky. OK, the Commissioner has been brought in to lead the police crackdown. What's your response to that? Well, look, I mean, politics has to be set aside at the moment, not just between the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, but also within the government. The only thing that matters is what works. And I have to say that in line with what Chris Bowen was saying this morning, and I think some frustration from within the government, these orders are complicated, they're hard to enforce, and many people are confused about it. So, I mean, I'm not going to offer a blanket support for a set of rules I haven't seen yet, but if this is a measure to make them easier to understand and therefore easier to enforce, Labor will support it because we don't want this disease being transmitted in our communities, and we want to get through this lockdown and this period in as short a period of time as possible, as well as not spread the disease to parts of Sydney that don't have it yet. I know you haven't seen the plans, they're being drafted at the moment, but have you got any idea of what level of enforcement that you would be comfortable with? Look, it's very difficult. It's such a hypothetical question, but we've got faith in Mick Fuller. He's led the response before in the previous lockdown. As I said, as long as the focus is on making sure that people comply with the health orders, everybody in Sydney, in my understanding, certainly talking to my own electorate, people understand that this is about not spreading the disease. It's not an assault on people's civil liberties or designed to make life harder. It's really an effort to make sure that we are in lockdown for a shorter period of time as possible. And Peter, as you've reported, these health orders have changed many times over the last 6 weeks. In many ways, they're difficult to keep pace with. And I think the police themselves are finding it difficult to understand what the latest restrictions and measures are. Yeah, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? Are the health orders up to scratch in your view? Well, look, I mean, the general premise, which is that you shouldn't be leaving your home, that you have to work from home unless you're an essential worker, are correct. But there are different difficulties in understanding, particularly around the 8 or now they're 9 LGAs and the neighbouring LGA, whether and where it's legal to cross over that border, whether it's to do shopping, whether it's to offer care to a loved one, whether you're in those single bubbles. I mean, they're difficult things to get your head around. Obviously, you can't have perfection at a time like this. This is really about making sure that you get the best option possible. That's got to be the focus. OK, you mentioned the singles bubble there because there's a couple of loopholes that are being considered at the moment, that there may be some changes. And it relates to visiting real estate, it relates to visiting holiday homes, and potentially it relates to a singles bubble. There may be changes on those three fronts. What do you make of that? Real estate, for sure. I mean, I think travelling to regional New South Wales and potentially infecting massive communities in New South Wales that are not in Sydney is completely crazy. I think the government acknowledges that that is a loophole that needs to be closed. You can't have people living in Sydney travelling to regional parts of New South Wales and therefore exposing those communities. We'd have to have a really close look at the singles bubble. I mean, we would need evidence that The changes to the rules in relation to that have meant that the Delta variant has spread at a faster rate. But look, we've shown throughout this pandemic that we'll act in a bipartisan way. If the government is basing their decisions on the health advice, we'll offer bipartisan support. We don't want to make this political. We only care about what's going to work.
OK, and also an admission this morning too from the Premier that the safety net on evictions, which runs out in just over a week, that is going to be extended, and that is good news.
It's massively good news for people, particularly small and medium-sized businesses who for the last 6 weeks have in many cases had landlords knocking on the door saying you've got to pay your rent. Now, there's no money coming through the door. I know in my own electorate, hairdressers, people that run cake shops and those that aren't supermarkets have found it very difficult to tell their landlords that they don't have the money because there's no business coming through. So this agreement should have been in place when the pandemic began. I'm very happy that there's been a change in rhetoric and seemingly a change in policy because it's been an anxious wait for the last 6 weeks for thousands of small and medium-sized businesses in New South Wales.
But there's also got to be some changes, and I'm not sure how you do it, but brighter minds will be able to figure out the Service New South Wales app, which is absolutely folding under pressure at the moment. There's more than $1 billion worth of money that is due to be shipped out to businesses that need it. Are you worried that businesses will go under before they actually get that money?
This is a big risk. I mean, at the moment, the statistics from yesterday were that there are over 100,000 applications for that small business grant for small businesses in New South Wales. They'd processed around 30,000 of them. So, around 33% of cases have been done, or 30% of cases had been serviced by Service New South Wales. You've got tens of thousands of businesses that are waiting for some money to come through the door. This goes to this idea of JobKeeper. I mean, if it had been administered by the Commonwealth Government through the BAS and ATO system, the money would have been in people's hands. We've got this hybrid system operating in New South Wales, and for thousands of people, it's not working. Now, look, I'm not trying to throw eggs at the New South Wales Government. We genuinely need to get this fixed because time is running out for those businesses. I'm worried they're not going to survive, particularly if this lockdown, as it seemingly will, continues on for many more weeks.
Yeah,